Ireland faced some of its most violent and difficult times in its troubled history. Now on BBC One Northern Ireland we look back at the hunger strike.
Political status.
There are enough votes in this constituency to elect Bobby Sands.
30,000.
Yeah!
These blocks were built by the British in 1975, in the mid-70s, as part of the criminalisation policy to break Republican prisoners. So you just walk in through these double...
In 1972, Republican prisoners had won what they described as political status, following a hunger strike by Brian McKee, who believed he was a prisoner of war. They wore their own clothes and were allowed to mix freely with each other within the Nissan huts of Long Kesh prison. On the 1st of March 1976, the Labour government removed special category status from Republican and Loyalist prisoners, treating them as ordinary criminals from then on. But Republican prisoners refused to accept that they were criminals. In the newly built H blocks of the Maze prison, they began one of the most divisive protests in the history of the Troubles. It ended with the deaths of 10 men who believed so strongly in their convictions that they were willing to starve themselves to death.
During the protesting days, you were locked in a cell down one of these wings with no clothes, no furniture, nothing in the cell with the exception of a mattress on the floor, a couple of blankets to wear, and a chamber pot. That's all you had, yet they continued to search every day, and some of that was pretty brutal, some of it was hard, but one of the most despicable aspects of the searching was the mirror search that was introduced. They'll bring you up to an area around where the wash hand basins and showers and toilets are, and they'd have a mirror sitting on the floor, and you'd have to squat naked over the top of that. They would force you down over the top of that there. There was a lot of brutality took place during those wing shifts.
No longer allowed to wear their own clothes, Republican prisoners chose to go naked rather than wear the prison uniform. They were isolated in their cells for most of the day and wore blankets in place of clothes. As their protest escalated, they refused to slop out and smeared their excrement on the walls in what became known as the No Wash or Dirty protest.
The Dirty protest was absolutely horrendous. The whole thing was absolutely vile in terms of hygiene and conditions. It was vile. There's no other way to put it.
There's a lot of staff wouldn't work in any of the striker blocks because of the smell and everything else. It's like they say, get used to everything. Well, we got actually used to it, but didn't smell it. Some of the things they'd done was first class. And so he used to go into, there's one of the ones that went in, and he used to decorate the cell with shit. So he walked in and he had a fireplace designed on the wall, and he had a window with curtains on it. Nice floral effect. Just they'd done this with a full metal mattress. And it was first class. It was like walking into a little room.
We're political prisoners! We want political status! We're political prisoners!
While it is very difficult to have a prison regime with people fouling their nests, as it were. I don't think anybody was very seriously concerned about people living in foul nests, bearing in mind what they'd done.
Don't forget, these were the same people that were actually shooting us and shooting our families and planting bombs and sending parcel bombs and everything else. So it didn't have a lot of sympathy for them.
Over the 4-year period of the No Wash protest, the IRA waged a fierce war of attrition against prison more sharply when Margaret Thatcher won a decisive victory in the general election. Humphrey Atkins was appointed Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. A little-known MP called Frank Maguire held on to his seat in Fermanagh, South Tyrone, a constituency that would later play a crucial role in the unfolding drama of the hunger strike.
The British government, which I worked for and supported, was engaged in a very difficult and radical overhaul of the British economy. And this issue in Ireland was not to do with the British economy.
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony.
Ireland was as foreign as Sri Lanka.
May we bring faith, and where there is despair, may we bring hope.
Mrs. Thatcher just didn't rate them. You know, these were out of her radar. What are these mad people doing?
POWs up the row! Fuck you to that blanket man! Political status for blanket men!
By now, over 400 prisoners had joined the No Wash protest and had summarised their protest into 5 demands. They were the right to wear their own clothes, the right not to do prison work, the right to mix freely with other prisoners, the right to visits, parcels, recreational and educational activities, the right to restoration of lost remission. The most important of these was the right to wear their own clothes.
You can see it's a very, very tight cell, and the mattress on the floor, there had been one down this way and one down this way, and actually it wasn't the way this is. What you had was just simply the sponge. It was just the sponge. You can actually just rip that like so, right, and you could hide a note in there and then just sort of push that back together again. The communication for the entire camp involved smuggling notes, going out on a visit, meeting someone from another block and smuggling notes and exchanging notes back and forward, which was the same process for communication with outside.
We decided that we had to do something to break through the wall of silence, and we decided to escalate our protest. We believed that we couldn't continue as it was because people would go insane with the type of imprisonment.
Okay, this is the canteen. The only time we used this during the protesting period of 76 to 81 was for Mass on a Sunday morning. And the whole way down, just from about here on down, would have been somewhere in the region of 120 prisoners. The noise level in the place was absolutely phenomenal.
At that time, about the only occasion or opportunity we would have had to discuss anything among ourselves in private was at Sunday morning Mass. And it was at Sunday morning Mass that we talked this over and took the decision that we had to break the deadlock via a hunger strike.
But first, the prisoners had to persuade the IRA leadership outside the prison of their decision to hunger strike.
Outside the prison was totally opposed to it. Adams was totally opposed to it. I mean, let's make no bones about that. Gerry Adams didn't think a hunger strike would work.
I mean, we were extremely busy trying to regroup, reorganise, build Sinn Féin, and the prison struggle was starting to sort of cut in on that, and we were also concerned that people put themselves through a hunger strike, and Margaret Thatcher wasn't going to give in.
The advice that they were given was a description of hunger strike, its physical effects on the body, and politically. And this was crucial, that we did not believe that Thatcher, given her personality, would concede. So what we said to them, if you hunger strike, you're dying, and even after your death, there is no guarantee that the demands are going to be met.
What the prisoners in the maze wanted was, I would have thought, obtainable and reasonable. The way in which they wanted it, which would have been a theatrical victory, was not reasonable, and they weren't likely to get it out on top of it.
I think Mrs. Thatcher was adamant from the very beginning that there would be no concessions whatsoever during the strike. That's it. That's what they want to do, they do it, but there will be no concession.
Efforts by the Catholic Church and the Irish government failed to avert the first hunger strike. The prisoners' minds were made up. On the 27th of October 1980, 7 men began a hunger strike.
We and my 6 comrades are prepared to go through with this, and we are prepared to die to prove that we are special prisoners, and our 5 basic demands are just.
The other 6 people on the hunger strike along with me were Leo Green from Lurgan, John Nixon from Armagh, Tom McFeely from the Four Glen in Dungiven, Tommy McKerney from the Moy, and Sean McKenna from Newry, and obviously Brenton Hughes, who was the OC from Belfast.
When the fast began, Brendan Hughes was replaced as leader of the prisoners by Bobby Sands, who wasn't on the first hunger strike.
When my name was taken and accepted as one of those who would go on hunger strike, it still was a chilling moment for me, and it was still a significant moment for me, but it wasn't altogether surprising because I was expecting to be selected.
The campaign for the prisoners gathered momentum as increasing numbers of people spilled onto the streets.
The demands these prisoners are making are reasonable demands.
Seasoned campaigner Bernadette McAliskey was in the front line of the H-Block campaign, with committees established throughout Ireland.
All of this activity was going on. There were H-Block committees the length and breadth of the country. And Sean McKenna was inching towards death.
On the 45th day, my body broke down very, very rapidly. My body was slowly poisoning from the periphery, and it was creeping from my fingers and my toes in towards the centre of my body. So my battle actually wasn't with life or death in my own mind. It actually was happening in my body, or with the political ramifications of what was happening outside. I was struggling with death by poisoning.
Sean McKenna was no longer able to drink the vital water that would prolong his life. At the 11th hour, the government opened a secret line of communication to Gerry Adams through MI6 agent Michael Oatley, who was codenamed the Mountain Climber.
Our position was simply to act as a conduit in a very unsatisfactory communication line between the prisoners and the British government.
They spoke that they wanted it resolved and that they were preparing a paper. So I was informing Brenton Hughes that a new paper was being prepared by the British government and that it was on its way.
Clearly, Brendan, at the 11th hour, so to speak, is in a dilemma. He's aware that the document is on its way to the prison. The British government put it on a plane with an individual who is described as the Mountain Climber. He's bringing the document to an intermediary that's sent by Republicans to the airport to be handed over there. The document is to be brought to the prison. prisoners are to read the document. They are to decide, is there enough in this document to end the hunger strike without anybody dying?
All these different people are telling us that this is it, the resolution of the hunger strike.
You could understand the psychological and other pressures. Was Sean going to die? And then a document was going to come in.
Brendan said that on the strength of what the priest had told him, that the document was on its way and it would satisfy the 5 demands that he had instructed the doctor to feed Sean, and that the hunger strike was over.
I was at a meeting with the person who brought the document in Clonard Monastery, and if my memory serves me right, Tom Hartley, who was heading up our POW department, burst into the room and said the hunger strike's over. This is as we were actually parsing the document, we were told the hunger strike was over.
Crucially, none of the prisoners, including Bobby Sands, had read the government document before the first hunger strike was called off.
At that point, everybody took, if you like, the Michael Collins stand, the freedom to win freedom, the space to win more, and everybody backed off. I would have held the line. It would have been a very cold, very hard position. That I was in favour of holding it. I had no power to hold it. I'd have let John McKenna die.
I don't think anybody wanted to see Sean McKenna dying, but I do think that they who had argued so ferociously to have a hunger strike knew that the value of a hunger strike was that you had to be prepared to die on hunger strike, or bring it right to death's door, and that the British were liable to come to the last minute with some offer, and you had to be able to be ready for that.
The next morning, the warder came to my cell and said, right, you have to go over and see Sands here. He actually shook my hand. He said, there you are. He says, it's over. You've got what you were looking for. He said, fair play to you. Like, you fought hard enough for it and all the rest. And that was my general mood. Then, you know, that we had won, that things were sorted, that everything was going to be okay. Walked into H3 and Bobby came out and he said, it's not looking good here.
The document you could have driven a carriage and horse through. It was one of those very typical British documents where they could do two totally opposite things if they wanted.
Bobby Sands' view was that the government had won the battle when the first hunger strike was called off. He immediately planned for a second hunger strike.
It was over a period of days and maybe a week or two that he was persuaded to try and implement the document. And so his agreement was, okay, I'll try.
While Bobby Sands was trying to negotiate inside the prison, outside an assassination attempt was made on Bernadette McAliskey. The UDA had already killed 3 other leading members of the National H Block Committee.
I was hit 8 times from the neck to the knees. I should have died. I didn't. And my husband was hit in the stomach and in the kidneys and in the head. And he didn't die.
As Bernadette McAliskey was recovering in hospital, Bobby Sands appeared to have made a breakthrough in the prison dispute. The prisoners were told that they would be allowed to wear civilian clothes. However, when the prison authorities revealed that they would provide them with civilian-type clothing rather than their own clothes, the prisoners wrecked their cells and the negotiation ended.
Civilian-type clothing arrived in. They were like Oxfam rejects. It was totally unbelievable, the clothes that they supplied. You wouldn't have worked for a bit.
The problem was there was no will, either inside the prison among the prison officials at a senior level or those in the Northern Ireland office who believed that here was another opportunity to grind the prisoners down.
Whenever Bobby started to prepare for the second hunger strike, he actually wrote me a column, and he said, look, I'm getting ready for this. I'm trying to put a brave face on with the rest of the lads here and on the wing. I've had my mother and father up and the rest of the family, and I'm explaining to them, you know, that we can break the British here. He says, but as far as you're concerned, I want you to know that I don't think we've any chance of breaking the British until somebody actually dies.
When 26-year-old Bobby Sands from Belfast made the decision to lead the second hunger strike, he was in no doubt that he would die in a direct confrontation with the government. He was serving 14 years for possession of weapons. The second hunger strike started on the 1st of March 1981 and lasted for 4 months, resulting in the deaths of 10 men inside the prison. Over 50 people died violently on the streets of Northern Ireland in the public turmoil that accompanied the strike.
Bobby Sands starts the hunger strike. He's joined by Francis Hughes 2 weeks later, who's joined by Patsy O'Hara 2 weeks after that, who's joined by Raymond McCreesh 2 weeks after that. Clearly, the 2-week gap between each prisoner was designed to allow the authorities to resolve the hunger strike in the event of the prisoner dying. So when Bobby died, there was a 2-week period, in theory.
Bobby believed that Thatcher was Thatcher, she was going to hold out, and that he was going to die, and he was going to see that the Irish could just be just as resolute and as strong and as steadfast and prepared to die for what they believed in. Right? Thatcher thought she was strong. He was saying, I'm going to show you what strength is.
Thatcher was still not the Iron Lady at that time. She'd only had been a couple of years in office. She was making her name as Iron Lady. So the backdrop was Thatcher's defining statement, a crime is a crime is a crime.
Crime is crime is crime. It is not political, it is crime. And there can be no question of granting political status.
She was a Prime Minister preeminently a principle. And the principle mattered here. You shall not give in to terrorists. I mean, if they want to kill themselves, they're right. And frankly, there would have been many who would say good riddance. I don't think the government said that for obvious reasons.
The Northern Ireland office had decided not to issue health bulletins on Bobby Sands' condition in order to reduce the media coverage of the strike. However, 4 days after Bobby Sands began his fast, events took a dramatic and entirely unforeseen turn when Frank Maguire, the MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone, suddenly died. Frank Maguire's brother Noel was seen as the natural successor to the seat, but he stood aside to allow a clear run for Bobby Sands.
I'm withdrawing because I have been told that the only way of saving Bobby Sands' life is to let him to go forward.
As the only nationalist candidate, Bobby Sands' main opponent was the then leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Harry West. The fiercely fought election campaign was a baptism of fire for Sinn Féin's entry into electoral politics.
Sinn Féin didn't know its electoral ass from its elbow. It came up to Fermanagh South Tyrone and it learnt its electoral trade in the Bobby Sands election.
Republicans like myself, Gerry Adams, other people, we hadn't a clue about elections. I never fought an election. I hadn't voted before. But there were people like Bernadette McCalskey and others who knew all about elections and knew how to fight them.
It is perfectly clear that there are enough votes in this constituency to elect Bobby Sands.
The attention of the world's media was guaranteed after a high turnout in the battle between the Unionist Party and a Republican prisoner now 41 days into his hunger strike.
I always remember the news whenever the electoral officer was declaring the result.
Sands, Bobby, anti-H block.
You hear this massive scream in the background.
30,000. 492.
And that's Danny Morrison screaming, victory.
I declare that Bobby Sands has been duly elected to serve as a member for the said constituency.
In the Maze prison, the prisoners heard the result on a smuggled crystal radio, but had been warned not to react.
People are trying to silently scream, and then just the whole camp sort of erupted. I think there was another wing went before us, and then probably unintelligible screaming and jeering. Because it wasn't just about winning the election, it was this thing that winning the election, like we've won the demands, because if the whole policy is about criminalisation and you're seen as criminal and people elect you, and actually elect you with more votes than Maggie Thatcher was elected, and then well, surely the policy is out the window.
Just because people make an unwise or foolish choice electorally, it doesn't mean to say that it has any great meaning. You see, it didn't affect the balance of power in England. It wasn't like a shift of government here.
Bobby Sands was now an MP in the British Parliament. But Mrs. Thatcher stood firm on refusing concessions to the hunger strikers and changed the law to prevent prisoners standing for election.
After the euphoria of the election had sort of settled, it was fairly traumatic. The whole sense of pain, the sense of a couple of 100 yards away, that these guys were dying.
There are no times whatsoever when it is better to concede to terrorists, full stop. And I'm not having moral equivalence between an elected government and a bunch of thugs who are killing people. I'm simply not having it. If people choose to kill themselves in prison, that's their affair.
As Bobby Sands approached 51 days on hunger strike, 3 Irish politicians were allowed to visit him in the prison hospital.
I heard on the BBC that I had been invited by the Prisoner Support Group with Sheila De Valera and Neil Blaney. We went in and the warder announced visitors from the European Parliament. As was customary in my position, I immediately checked his pulse, which was very weak and thready. And I came to the conclusion that minute that he had very little time left. But I held his hand, and it was like the hand of a corpse. It was so cold. He was very gaunt, and the pallor was unbelievable. And I put my arm around him, and I could feel the projecting bones at the back, the shoulder blades. You know, there was very little flesh there. It was just skin. And as he talked, by the way, the lips cracked, and out came blood, and it turned black. Sheila De Valera, while I was talking to him, looked on, and her eyes were full of tears, you know, and she broke down crying, actually, and she again emphasized the fact that he was a great hero. We left and we went to the press conference, and I called on Margaret Thatcher to accede to his demands.
I found that I could not persuade him. I emphasised how important his own life was. I didn't think a life...
Within an hour came a reply from Margaret Thatcher, and she said, It is not my habit or custom to talk to MPs of a foreign country about a UK citizen resident in the UK. I did go to Mr. Haughey and I told him exactly what Mrs. Thatcher had said. He did pass a remark about her. As far as I can recall, he said, the bloody bitch.
Outside the prison, tensions grew as Bobby Sands neared his death. A series of international mediators entered the maze in a last-ditch attempt to resolve what had now become a public crisis.
Did you see Mr. Sands?
No. The unionist view at this time was that unnecessary attention was being given to Bobby Sands, while little or none was given to the killing of members of the security forces by the IRA.
Whenever this criminal puts on a suicide performance, a stunt for the publicity that he'll get out of it, then everybody comes running. Not only the Human Rights Commission, but every American crank that's possible to comes over to Northern Ireland to let us hear what he has to say.
Back because I remember the last time that I saw Bobby Sands. This is his cell. Bobby was propped up on the bed. He was resting on a couple of pillows. Very, very gaunt. He was pained at talking. His breathing was laboured, and it was difficult for him. And I just told him that I would leave him rest, and I would go on back to the block. And that Daddy just says, "I'm dying, Cara. I'm dying." And that was the last time that I saw him after I left the room.
How's your son, Mrs. Sands?
My son's dying, and I would like to appeal to the people for to remain calm and to have no fighting or cause no death or destruction. My son's offered his life for better conditions in prison, but not to cause further death outside. That's all I can say.
How is he today?
He's dying.
On the 5th of May, 1981, Bobby Sands died after 66 days on hunger strike.
Brendan got up to the door and just shouted out, "Bobby's dead." It was just a very, I suppose, solemn day. People started speaking very hushed tones, and a lot thought about Bobby's family, particularly his mother.
I was on night guard that night. I could turn around, it was the worst thing in the world, but I'd be a liar to say that. I'd be a liar to say that. Their choice. They chose to do that. They committed suicide.
100,000 people attended the funeral of Bobby Sands. The oration by his election agent, Owen Carron, ended with the words, "Bobby Sands, your sacrifice will not be in vain."
When he died, what happened? The protests in Milan and Lisbon and Paris, in Athens, Zurich, throughout the world. The name of Bobby Sands was on everybody's lips as a martyr. And that wasn't coming from Bobby Sands' mental attitude. It was coming from the mental attitude of millions of people around the world. People did think that this power that went out from the hunger strikers, that went all over the world, that it would move the British government. People couldn't believe that they couldn't be moved by it.
I think it was a great unnecessary sadness that it got to the state it did. But she was the wrong administration to pick a direct fight. A lot of her legend, a lot of her appeal to people was that she did take on challenges. She wasn't a pushover.
Had there been a different thinking inside the British government, the outcome might have been different. But no. Someone had sold the British government the idea, and in particular Thatcher. Break these people, you've won.
Bobby Sands' death set the pattern of what was to come. On the 12th of May, Francis Hughes from Balahi died on the 59th day of his fast. At 27 years old, he was a legendary figure, having once been described by the security forces as the most wanted man in Ireland. He was serving life for murder.
In many a way, his death was a relief. A relief we felt for Francis. His suffering was over. It was a relief for the family. The family had got peace of mind knowing that he was at peace. Francis' remains was taken to Foster Green Hospital for a post-mortem. We all gathered at Foster Green to accompany his remains to Balahi.
The mortuary police refused to release the coffin to prevent it being exploited by Republican demonstrators.
It was one occasion in my life where I was frightened. Really, really frightened. The brutality of the RUC was unreal. And they suggested that they would take Francis' coffin out of the hearse and dump it along the road or burn it. They were so evil.
Now, can you give me a reasonable explanation why we cannot go the traditional route, which we take every day?
Stuart! Stuart! Come on, get back! Quick!
Bobby Sands died a week ago, and the British government did not relent. Do you believe that your brother's death will make any difference to their attitude?
Hopefully, yes. But I would just like to say that Margaret Thatcher, the British government, has murdered my brother. Francis' blood is in Margaret Thatcher's hands.
As Francis Hughes was buried, anger spread through the nationalist communities of Northern Ireland. Tensions continued to grow, with the burials of IRA member Raymond McCreesh from South Armagh and INLA member Patsy O'Hara from Derry's Bogside. They were 24 when they died on the same day in May, after 61 days on hunger strike. With 4 hunger strikers now dead, the Catholic Church and the Irish government came under extreme pressure to mediate in the escalating crisis. The Irish Commission for Justice and Peace was a human rights organisation set up by the Catholic Church.
I had 2 cousins who were involved in the hunger strike, Francis Hughes and Tom McElwee, and through contact with my cousins, I got the impression that there was some openness to negotiate about the outcome of the hunger strike, and I reported that back to the Commission in Dublin.
It was quite clear that whereas the first 4 hunger strikers had now died, and sad and all as that was, there was a potential for a solution. But if Joe McDonnell died, you were into a new cycle.
The oldest of the hunger strikers, 30-year-old Joe McDonnell from Belfast, was married with 2 young children. He had been arrested with Bobby Sands following the bombing of a furniture factory in Dunmurry.
You're talking about very narrow windows of opportunity. You're talking about a situation that was changing from moment to moment, certainly from day to day.
On the 29th of June, Secretary of State at the time, Humphrey Atkins, again refused to negotiate with the hunger strikers. However, the Prisons Minister, Michael Allison, met with the Commission members soon after, leading them to believe they could broker a solution, especially on the crucial issue of clothes. Joe MacDonald's condition was deteriorating rapidly when the Commission met the hunger strikers to discuss their proposals.
First meeting with the hunger strikers was something I will never ever forget till I go to my grave. 6, 7 of them particularly, gaunt, emaciated, faces staring out at you. Their eyes were very deep in their head, but there was a sharpness and a stare in their eye that I have never seen since or before. They quickly got into the discussions, but from the very first meeting, there was this overhang of distrust, major distrust emanating from the collapse of the previous hunger strike.
The Irish Commission thought it was negotiating directly between the hunger strikers and the government, but Mrs. Thatcher had involved MI6 over the head of her local minister. The mountain climber, who was involved in secret talks with the Republican leadership during the first hunger strike, now re-established contact through Gerry Adams, the lead negotiator for the Republican movement.
The back channel opened, it was going to open anyway. You know, if they'd opened it for the first run, they were clearly going to open it for the second run.
Gerry Adams held a secret meeting with the Irish Commission for Justice and Peace.
I decided to brief them on where the situation was, because I could just see it going off on a complete distraction. And we did brief them on where it was. And we did so in an attempt to get them to butt out.
He explained to us what was going on, and really what he was saying, you're a distraction. We have a direct line here. We're close to some kind of a solution. We had a showdown then with Michael Allison where we said, look, this is unbelievable that this should be going on while Margaret Thatcher is telling us that she won't negotiate with terrorists. And we're carrying on our discussions, and simultaneously she has a direct link back to Sinn Féin and the IRA. And Michael Allison certainly gave us a very strong impression that he didn't know about this.
He was quite frank in a way that only British Tory ministers can be, a sort of self-effacing, I'm afraid I'm not a sufficient plenipotentiary. After saying, I'm not a sufficient plenipotentiary, he said, I'm afraid there's a lady behind the veil. And that clearly meant that he had had some dressing down from Downing Street.
Richard O'Raw was press officer for the prisoners during the second hunger strike. 25 years later, he controversially claims that, as Joe MacDonald was dying, he and the leader of the prisoners, Bick McFarlane, had agreed that a deal from the British government should be accepted.
Bick wrote me up a column outlining what was on offer and the nature of the contact. And me and him looked at it, and we agreed that the offer was enough for us to end the hunger strike. A column came in from the outside leadership saying that they did not think that what was on offer was enough to successfully end the hunger strike. And that was it. The outside leadership had spoken. This was the Army Council of the IRA, as far as we were concerned. They didn't think that what was on offer validated the deaths of the 4 men.
Richard, for some reason, is unable to distinguish between an offer and a deal. When the hunger striker said to them, OK, what does this offer consist of? Convert it into a deal so that we can see that we're not repeating what happened at Christmas, and they refused. I mean, they kept coming across with this false promise of, we want to resolve it, we want to resolve it, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're looking for this way of doing it, and yet they would never, ever put down in black and white what would happen if the hunger strike ended and what was on offer.
On the 8th of July, both initiatives ended when the 5th hunger striker, Joe MacDonald, died after 61 days on hunger strike.
We were angry at both sides, but in particular we were angry with Margaret Thatcher. When you're dealing with somebody like that, you're very disillusioned when you discover that they're playing at least as dirty a game as the other side. And it was really frightening to us that we could have been negotiating with ministers of the British government, and that there had been a direct line of contact back to Margaret Thatcher, and that it should all have been a sham. We were really angry at that. I suppose it killed our naivety.
It takes a bit of time to formulate a proposal or a set of ideas which are clear-cut and balanced and reasonable, and this had to take its natural time course. We couldn't, in other words, gear everything to the unknown length of time which a particular man might have to live. Sad that it is to say so.
When the 6th hunger striker, Martin Herson from Galbally in County Tyrone, died on the 13th of July after only 46 days on hunger strike, the families were reaching breaking point. As the prisoners continued to starve themselves to death, the person who began to force an end to the hunger strike was Father Dennis Fall.
All the decent people, let us say, of Ireland, the church people, the Commission for Justice and Peace, the Taoiseach, the two Taoiseachs in Dublin, the European Commission for Human Rights, the International Red Cross, all these people have come in and tried to settle it. And they have all been snubbed and deceived by the British and bitterly criticised, if you like, mauled by the provisional side and told to get out of the way. So these two are left now almost facing each other, eyeball to eyeball, like two boxers in a ring.
Monsignor Raymond Murray worked closely with Father Fall and shared his concern about who was directing the hunger strike.
When it was understood Margaret Thatcher would let 20, 30, 70 people die, then a great sense of despair hit people, that it would be becoming a kind of orgy. They weren't going to win. There'd come a stage when people had to look at a thing realistically. And what were the Republicans outside going to do? Why didn't they go in and force the men to end it?
The focus of the hunger strike had now changed from a battle between the prisoners and the government to a battle between the Republican movement and the families of the hunger strikers. Questioning the continuation of the hunger strike, Father Fall convened a meeting between the families and Gerry Adams and demanded that the prisoners be ordered off the protest. According to Adams, he was powerless to make that decision.
They had decided to go on this hunger strike and they were telling everybody, don't take us off it. Not their mummies, their wives, their sisters, their fathers. Nobody was to take them off this. So no more than a parent could any of us intervene.
Responding to pressure from Father Fall and the families, Gerry Adams did meet the hunger strikers the next day in the prison.
But we told them very basically that the people who we were talking to, the people in the room, could all be dead. And they said, so be it.
In August 1981, 3 more hunger strikers died. They were Kevin Lynch from Dungiven, Kieran Doherty from Belfast, and Tom McElwee from County Derry. All 3 were in their early 20s. While on hunger strike, Kieran Doherty had been elected to the Irish Parliament. Owen Carron later replaced Bobby Sands as MP for Fermanagh South Tyrone. As each hunger striker died, they were still being replaced by prisoner after prisoner prepared to die for their convictions. But their parents and wives now took a stand and started taking them off the hunger strike when they lapsed into unconsciousness.
So we brought us into a wee room and asked us what we was going to do.
I said he was to get medical attention immediately.
Michael Devine of the INLA was the last of the 10. He died on the 20th of August 1981 after 60 days on hunger strike.
I think nothing compares to the protracted agony of those 10 men dying. Most of them I knew. Many of them were very good friends of mine, and the slow, protracted nature of their death was agonising for those of us who knew them and knew what they were going through, and it lasted for such a long period of time that it was numbing.
Lawrence McKeown from Randallstown would have been the 11th to die.
In my case, I was fairly lucky. I mean, there's some people who took sick fairly early on, couldn't keep the water down. And it was crucial that you could keep water down, because whenever your body is cannibalising itself, and it creates all sorts of toxins in your system, which puts massive pressure on your kidneys and your liver. The other thing that, and it was probably at the latter stages of the hunger strike, you could actually smell your own body and smell the wing, and not smell as in a body odour, but actual smell of rotten flesh is literally what you smell. I had a very good relationship with my mother. I think we had a pretty good understanding anyway. And what she said to me at that time was, "Do you know what you have to do?" And I know what I have to do. And I think it was probably the only words that were actually spoken. She would have sat there and held my hand or whatever. When your unconscious power of attorney shifted to your next of kin, then she would do what she felt she had to do, which is what she did on the 70th day, which was to authorise medical intervention.
Lawrence McKeown had been within hours of death when his mother saved his life. He had lasted 70 days with only a daily intake of water and a pinch of salt, the longest period a prisoner had been on hunger strike, and survived. Despite being so close to death, he recovered his health and now works for an ex-prisoners organisation. As more and more families took their sons off the protest, it was clear it was the beginning of the end of the hunger strike. It had reached a natural conclusion.
Morning.
In September 1981, Humphrey Atkins was replaced as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland by Jim Pryor. The new prisons minister was Lord Gowrie.
Mrs. Thatcher had run the Atkins period much more directly from number 10. The new administration, the Pryor administration, was cut more slack. I saw the parents. I spent a lot of time with the families and with Fall and Murray, and then used to go and see O'Fee, Cardinal O'Fee, who was a great relief because it was the only nice food in the province at the time. Kept a wonderful table.
The hunger strike, whilst it had not achieved its desired result, had publicised it well enough for us to take a decision to end it. There was nothing more to be gained, only grief and hurt for families.
On the 3rd of October, the remaining hunger strikers agreed to end their protest. 3 days later, Jim Pryor announced all prisoners could wear their own clothes. While the government claimed that it never gave in to the 5 demands, the prisoners' view was that all of them were granted eventually.
No concessions have been made to the IRA, and there will be certainly no perpetration of anything which looks like concessions to those who commit violence.
It was a kind of crisis, and it did allow people like me who insisted there had to be an Anglo-Irish dimension. It allowed us our say. You could say a legacy of the hunger strike, if you want to be positive, at a very high cost, is a far better understanding of the problem of Northern Ireland between London and Dublin.
People were fundamentally changed, I think, forever, really, by that sacrifice. Republicans learned the benefits of electoral politics.
The whole popularisation of electoralism, the process that we were about trying to build a political party. You know, there will still be, in our struggle next year and in 4 years' time and 10 years' time, there will still be the legacy of the hunger strike rolling out.
Personally, it shattered me. It took me years to recover from it. I find it even difficult now to talk about those 10 men and their families. You know, it's just what they came through. But 25 years later, it's like yesterday. It is still powerful, and I think that along with, in terms of republicanism, it's up there along with 1916 for its effects and inspiration.
I do not wish to be part of the retrospective writing of history, which adds another chapter to glorious and heroic failure. Because I think the people who are not part of it, the generation who will come after it, there is nothing being written that warns people never to do it again.